Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Business of Government on 1410 AM KBNP, the money station. Now, from the beginning, when we were designing the concept for this show, we decided it would be a forum for members of the business community to ask policymakers about issues that affect their bottom line. We decided that should apply to people seeking office as well. We have one such person joining us in the studio today. We have Karen Bowerman. She's a Republican seeking the nomination for Oregon's 5th Congressional District seat. Good afternoon, Karen.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Oregon's 5th Congressional District, I have a map here in front of me. It covers the coast from north of Tillamook down to just south of Yachats, includes Salem, Albany, and Lake Oswego, and goes east to Mount Hood National Forest. It's currently represented by Democrat Kurt Schrader, who's in his second term. He's a former longtime Oregon legislator. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your background, education, and experience?
Okay, I would be delighted to. I was a Kansas girl. I was born in Topeka and stayed there through my undergraduate years in Kansas. Went to Wichita State in political science and communication. And actually, it was a particular experience I had with a Professor Harder, who was a marvelous mentor at Wichita State, who said one time, "Karen, come and work with me in the governor's office for an internship." He was the educational advisor to the governor at the time. And I said I'd be delighted to, because that's my home. And so I went with him and wrote position papers for the governor. Every day, a new position paper on his desk. It was a wonderful experience. That is what planted the seed for me to say, whenever it's the right time in my life that I have an opportunity to serve in a manner like this particular governor, I want to step up to the plate if I possibly can. So that was an important, formative point in my life. Then I went off to Texas A&M, and that's where I was working to help the institution transition away from being an all-male military academy and in instilling in it more graduate programs for women, etc. It was a very, very interesting job. But at the time, I decided to get my doctorate then, too. So I got my PhD in administration and then took the natural step to decide to apply that in higher education. So I then went into higher ed and ultimately became a business dean, but worked for over 32 years in the California State University system in the field of business. So that's my background. That's a little bit about my experience. I'm so thrilled to be in a position now where I would have an opportunity to apply that experience in order to really tackle those issues that I think we need to face in Oregon and, frankly, in the nation.
All right. So you were a professor of business management in the California University system?
Right.
What was your emphasis there?
A couple of different areas. I started out with general management for undergraduates, and then as I branched out a bit, I taught strategy for business leaders, taught administrative theory, which is actually not theoretical. It's very applied, but that's another story I'd be delighted to tell you about. And then a little bit of business law as it relates to helping employers avoiding litigation.
That's critical.
Mm-hmm.
So I understand you've had some involvement with the Family Business Institute?
I created a Family Business Institute when I was in Fresno, and it was wonderful because at the same time that as a professor, and I was a professor at that time rather than an administrator, the same interest was in the business community as what I myself had on behalf of the university. So we linked together and offered educational services for family businesses. And those services ranged everything from things like, should you have a board of directors? Should it be family members? What if a family member is a part of the business but isn't performing well? Then what? What should you really do about it? And what are the awkward factors, which they're there, believe me, as for how to address them well and effectively if you're in a position that you need to do that? How about the death tax? How does that affect a family business? So we were able, working jointly, to identify what are the important issues for family businesses, and then to bring in the experts to address them. It was a wonderful mix of community, business leaders, and the university. And that's then what I really would strive to do throughout my career in administration, model that model.
Sure. Well, I mean, anymore, but I could recall my grandfather used to be able to start businesses, nearly 100 years ago with barely anything. Obviously, we have a lot more laws now. Society is a lot more complex, a lot more litigious society, we should say, right?
Absolutely.
So there's a lot more that goes into that now. So the Family Business Institute was essentially giving tools to would-be entrepreneurs to say, okay, you want to start a family business, but you don't know how to start. Here's some of the issues you're going to encounter, and here's how to deal with those.
That's right. And then for the established businesses as well that were family businesses, as they mature, how do they need to think about bringing in the next generation? Because that's the beauty of a family business, is when it's not just one generation and then out of business, but when it becomes second generation, third generation, which is a source of tremendous pride in most families when they're able to pass the business on in that manner. And, it's not necessarily small business. Think about Walt Disney Productions. That was a family business, and certainly not small. It started that way at one time, but it was successful and was thriving. And in part, it was thriving because the members of the family that would keep that business alive knew what they were doing in terms of I'm going to call it managing the family aspects of the family business too.
Now, in your stint in academia, you were the Dean of the College of Business and Public Administration at Cal State University, San Bernardino. I've read that college was named by European CEO magazine as one of the top 18 most innovative colleges of business in the world. I've seen that attributed to the fact that the MBA program had a robust international component.
That's correct. And I was very, very proud because this designation occurred just 3 months before my retirement from that institution. And so I felt like that was a very nice note upon which to leave that business college. But yes, it was in part because of the international program, because here we were on the Pacific Rim, and international programs are very important in developing exports from the area, just like they are from here, and utilizing students' attributes in terms of their international knowledge to work with the businesses to help the business accomplish their objectives. So there might be a student who speaks Vietnamese, knows the culture inside and out because they're from that culture, who would be paired with a business, and they would be able to really help each other in very interesting ways. And although the international component was one aspect of it, another was entrepreneurship, for which the college was really very well known. Again, primarily within the U.S. initially because of the excellent leadership from our entrepreneurship faculty. But I thought, we're known for entrepreneurship. By golly, we should also be known not just on the academic side, but on more or less the administrative side as a college that behaves in an entrepreneurial way. So right about at that time, I got a call from a gentleman in Europe, and he said, I'm from the European CEO, and we'd like to examine you. And I said, what in the world for?
Do they even have CEOs in Europe anymore? I mean, that sounds like a knock on them, but I don't know.
Oh, no.
All right, so for those of you just tuning in, this is the Business of Government on 1410 AM, KBNP, the Money Station. I'm your host, Scott Jorgensen. My guest today, Karen Bowerman, Republican candidate for Oregon's 5th Congressional District. We'll be right back after these messages. Welcome back to the Business of Government on 1410 AM KBNP, the Money Station. I'm your host, Scott Jorgensen. Our guest today, Karen Bowerman. She's the Republican candidate for Oregon's 5th Congressional District. Now let's talk a little bit about, your stint as a member of California Inland Empire District Export Council. From what I understand, you were appointed by the U.S. Secretary of Commerce, and one of the goals behind all this was to expand the international business activity.
That's correct. And of course, that's a concern for the Secretary of Commerce, and it's a concern for every state to develop its exports, because normally that is a unique way to bring in additional money flow into the U.S., money that would not otherwise be here. So increase of exports is good. It's good for jobs development. It's good for the economy.
So that's traded sector, right? That's one of those phrases that I hear thrown about ever so often in the business world, where you bring in money from beyond, as opposed to just kind of keeping money in the community where it cycles over and over again. This is the way of bringing wealth in from elsewhere.
Yes, and interestingly, this can develop both with goods as well as with services. We often think of it in terms of goods only, but services can be exported too. Education, for instance, was one of our exports from the university. So it counts too, because it is something that also brings in new money to the U.S. But goods are what we traditionally think of. For example, in Oregon, it's in computer-related aspects of manufacturing that is our primary export. Many other areas are important to Oregon. That just happens to be the primary one, an area where we'd like to have additional jobs.
In the last segment, you mentioned in passing as part of, we were discussing the Family Business Institute, you mentioned the death tax in passing. And I understand that you are a spokesperson for Oregon's death tax phase-out. That's an effort that's currently underway?
Yes, correct. It's a petition number 15, that we are in hopes of getting onto the November ballot for all Oregonians. And what it would do is phase out the death tax over a 4-year period, 25% per year. And that way, by 2016, the tax would be zero. Now, the primary beneficiaries of this would be small businesses and small family farms. Now, the reason is that here's what happens. The family business, family farm ends up having assets that are normally tied up in the business. They tend not to be in the form of liquid assets that are readily available to pay off that tax whenever the death of the matriarch or patriarch or whomever,
Sure.
Whenever that death occurs. So if the business happens to have a large amount of money, maybe up to as much as 40-50%, depending on where that business is, to pay it off that death tax, that's one thing. But most small businesses are not in that shape, particularly in this economy. So what do they have to do? They have to liquidate their business assets. And what that means is that without the facility, without the inventory, whatever it is they have to sell, that the heirs who were going to have those jobs as the jobs that kept them and their families alive now no longer have the business. And so that's why we say that with the implementation of this death tax, that it will add another 44,500 jobs by the time that death tax ends. So it's important on many levels to this state. So all a person has to do is find one of those petitions, either online or in person, sign it, and the instructions are there for mailing it in. Registered voters are the only ones who can sign this petition at endoregondeathtax.com.
Excellent. All right. That was part of your background in business. You've also volunteered for counseling small business startups. Is that involving a lot of the expertise that you developed as a business dean over the years?
You bet. And I have businesses coming to me from this western area of Oregon, and what they are typically seeking, where can I get startup money? Where can I get the expertise that I need if I need a partner or if I need an employee? How do I do this? What's involved? What's the red tape? What do I do in order to do it right? And it's such a pleasure to support these people at that point in achieving their dreams. Because if they're able to achieve their dreams, it is an assist not only to themselves Some of them are wanting to get off of welfare or food stamps. It's an assist to them in the most wonderful of ways. But often then they end up employing family or other people. It's an assist to the entire state. We want them to be successful.
Now, looking at the national picture here, obviously, we've had a pretty tough last few years as a country. And a lot of people think, man, we're on the wrong track. We need to get back on track. How can America reignite its entrepreneurial spirit? And what can Congress and the federal government do to make that happen?
Interesting question, because I think the first thing that needs to happen is just an acknowledgement that entrepreneurship is a key to the future of America. It has always been, and it always will be. Free enterprise is absolutely critical to our growth as a nation. It's that free spirit that creates long-lasting companies that make us what we are. And that must be acknowledged rather than feeling that there's any kind of a demonizing effect on those who are successful or tearing them down for their success. Let's build that up, because that helps us all. And then as far as what Congress can do, some of it starts with not doing anything, not regulating. It's maybe what they don't do. Sometimes I'll ask business people, what is it that you want out of Congress? And you know what the answer sometimes is? Leave me alone.
Sure.
So there's more to it than that, clearly. But that's an interesting start.
That relates to one of the other questions I had prepared here, which is, what are the biggest impediments to economic recovery right now? Do you think part of it is this whole mentality that we must demonize successful people? You owe me. You need to pay more in taxes. Because I hear a lot from business people that is troubling to them. It doesn't prompt a great investment environment.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And that kind of an approach tends to breed fear. Fear on both sides. It tends to polarize. Polarizing is not a good base for finding solutions to the issues that we have now in terms of our economy. Instead, we need to be thinking of areas that we have in common and to find a basis for reasonable dialogue in order to move forward in a really productive way. And I think in order to get there, we need to be realizing a positive message for the country rather than one that tends to rip us asunder from within. That's not the way to move forward together, and it is together that we're going to move forward well.
So we have just a couple of minutes left in this segment. This probably requires a bit of a longer answer, more time than we have, but you have a blog, and I noticed you posted on there last August this whole article about how we fix Social Security. And, to be honest, people my age, if you ask us about Social Security, we generally laugh out loud, right? As in, I don't think anybody my age expects that to be around, especially not in its current form by the time we're going to be old enough to collect on it.
And I hear that throughout the state.
Really?
And throughout the nation, actually. But I think that is a very realistic feeling of most young people. So I would say, as far as what to do about it, it would start with, in my opinion, putting our Congress people, our senators, on the same plan that all of us are on, so that they are thinking in terms of what is real for all of us, not thinking in terms of special programs that apply to them and not to us in general. Secondly, I think that we must honor what we have promised to people over a certain age, with agreement on whatever that age is, whether it's 50 or 55 or 45, whatever that age is. We must honor those commitments and promises that we have made to that generation. Number 3, I believe that people your age should be given the opportunity to opt out. And I know by talking with young people that many would really like to take that choice and say, okay, I would contribute a similar amount to what I might have contributed to Social Security otherwise, but do the investments on my own so that I will be ready for retirement, but at a hopefully better rate than I would be through Social Security. So that gets us down the road. Then the last part that we probably don't have time to talk about is the funding for the future. And that's key. It's going to take some real creativity and innovation. We've got it in us. We can do it.
All right. Looks like we're just about out of time here today. If we wanted to know a little bit more about your campaign, how could we find that out?
KarenBowerman.com, and that's Karen Bowerman, Bowerman.
Well, I'd like to thank you for joining us here today, Karen. And we'll be right back after these messages.